Topic 2. It's impossible to review video games.
I'm glad it's not actually impossible because
Not
I would literally not have a job.
Yeah. So you review games,
Yes,
and recently, last week, as of the time this posts, you posted a review for The Division.
Yes.
And you're getting a lot of opinions about your review.
Yes.
Reviews of your review, if you will.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I think it's great. Honestly, again, forgive me if I say things like yesterday or this morning when you guys are watching this, it'll be, or listening to it, it'll be last week. But I posted the final scored version of my review for The Division last night, and
gave it a 8.
I gave it a 6.7, which is an entirely solid, decent score.
Oh my word!
Why are you turning into a Southern gentleman again?
Sweet tea.
I would like
a Southern woman.
I would like to remind my Southern female friend here, and those of you at home, that on the IGN review scale, 6.7, 6 is the okay, what we call the okay range. So a 6.7 is okay, very closely approaching what I would call good.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, like, I just want to say, I want to make it clear, I don't want to come out and sound like, oh, woe is me, I have to deal with all this punishment. You want to know what? At least on Twitter, the overwhelming majority of my admittedly very small following,
everybody follow Vince,
has been, I totally disagree with your score, but you know what? That's cool, man. Like, you made your points, and like, to me, that makes me happy. I want games to be a place, and critique to be a place where different points of view can exist, and where people passionately,
and there can be rational discussion about it.
And there can be. And I
was very proud last night. I like The Division a lot, and so I'm on the subreddit, and I jumped into the subreddit last night, and they had it up there, and I went in there, and a lot of people were like, "Man, I don't agree with it, but he makes a lot of good points, and he is calling out this issue. Sounds more like this," but it wasn't like there was only one at the very bottom with like no upvotes that was like, typical IGN. They did not get paid enough for this. And then some guys like, that's not cool, and then they argued about that.
Yeah, no, that was the talk this morning too. It was, how a surprising number of people on that Reddit thread actually were willing to advocate, kind of for us and say, hey, look, this looks like a legitimate take on the game. But like, whatever, I don't want to self-congratulate about whatever The Division, but
yeah, you're great.
Thank you. But yeah, to what you're asking, Tim, like, yeah, it is hard. Because we get so attached, and I'm part of this, right? Like, we get so attached to these pieces of art and these pieces of entertainment, and I've certainly been there, and I'm still there. I'm still attached to them. When people talk shit on Evolve, I still get a little bit bristly because I loved that game. I gave it a 9, and a lot of people actually recently now, because of this review, are like, how could you give Evolve a 9 and The Division a 6.7? And when they start talking shit about Evolve, like, I don't like, want to fight a dude or anything, but like, I can feel it like there's something personal about that to me, because I really identified with and loved that game. I thought it was a well-designed, awesome experience that really spoke to me. And like, so when people want to be like, it's, when the people hate on it, I feel that in my heart. Like, I'm like, no, it's not that you're denying a part of who I am. So like, it's not that I'm blind to it. I totally understand why when people read a review that is not in line with how they feel, we just identify with the things that we love, even more so in games than in other mediums, and maybe a little bit, I'll admit, even for myself, maybe a little bit too much. So when you're putting forth a critique about something that a lot of people they hold dear and they're going to care about, and they're probably already making great memories. In the case of The Division, they're already making great memories, going on missions with their friends and having a good time. Like, people are going to feel a little bit slighted, and people are going to feel like, the best people of those will not attack you, right? But even though they don't attack you, they will go, hey, it's too bad that, for instance, here's one thing I read a couple times in my Twitter comments. People go, hey, respectfully disagree with your review, but good job. And a few people said, this is why I really think that there should be committee reviews, because having one person review a game means that there's other perspectives that aren't going to get seen. And they didn't quite word it that way, but I was like, this is how much we want to make sure that people with our tastes also have a voice. Like, it is a point to people who care about The Division, to some people who care about The Division, which, by the way, you shouldn't be worried about, because the game is Ubisoft's
Sold kind of well.
It's
Did
sold,
all right.
sold kind of well. Ubisoft's most successful new franchise, I think, ever.
Yeah.
In terms of sales. So don't worry, the Division's not going anywhere, regardless of what anyone has to say about it, let alone me. But there's this feeling where you're like, hey, to make sure that this is commercially viable, to make sure this product that I care about and believe in gets the due that it's worth, someone at a high, with a big sounding board needs to say what all of us feel, which is that the game is a lot of fun and the game is great. So I didn't say that, right? And they're willing to respect that, but they still hold on to the idea of you're kind of wrong,
right?
And someone who's right needs to say it. And that's always hard to kind of dole out, because even just from a reviews process, like how do you do that?
That
Like,
was always
I
the
don't
thing
know
when we
what
were
the
at
answer is.
IGN. People wanted, it's like, well, no, we can't do a review. You can't dedicate 3 people to one game, especially like something with
Yeah.
the Division that's so huge. What always cracks me up about the committee argument is like, oh, that's a great idea, and you live in that world. Literally every site in the world is reviewing this. If you need a number, if you don't need a number, yeah, there's that. At IGN itself, they've started a Division podcast you could listen to and get all those voices out and see all that. And to double back to your Evolve comparison, I saw people talking about that in the Reddit thread too, right? That's also one of those things that's so hard to separate the wheat from the chaff, right? Of like, you reviewed Evolve as Evolve is and was at launch, and this is what how you know what I mean? And like, you want to get down into the nitty-gritty of mechanics and how team play would exist in this, and when you run with a squad and how everybody, and like, that's all well and good. And Evolve had awesome systems and all these great things, right? And then it came out and it didn't find an audience and it fell away, right? That's not that doesn't need to be reflected in your review. Your review wasn't reviewing the experience and reaction and the lifespan of Evolve. Right. You were reviewing the mechanics and what it was and what it stands for. In the same way with the Division, you can't sit there and be like, yeah, okay, missions are repetitive and da-da-da, but if you have a great thing with 3 friends going on.
Sure, yeah. Because everything is better with 3 good friends, right? At that point, like a horrible, and I'm not saying the Division is akin to a horrible movie, but a bad movie can be a lot of fun if you have 3 friends along for the ride. That doesn't necessarily make it a better movie.
Bump a few stars into the review,
right.
Yeah.
You can't really look at it that way. Even though it's arguable that there are some movies that are better as a social experience, just like there's some music that's better as a social experience. But like as a critic listening to it or experiencing it in a vacuum, you just can't project what that experience might be like or how it might be affected.
I think the one thing, having reviewed, I guess, a couple hundred games, I would say, is that people don't, when people criticize criticism, I don't think, or critics, they don't take into account how difficult it is to criticize something. And I don't mean like literally like it's so hard to say this sucks or it's so, but what I'm saying is like, getting into the mind and the way of being a critic and being total like and accepting the subjectivity of criticism, and games have objective facts but not many, and like it runs on this engine, it's on this console, it costs this much, like those are basically the facts. Everything else, I can think this game controls like fucking magic and someone else can be like this game is trash and no one's right. I don't think people take that into account about like how difficult it is to kind of put yourself out there and do those kinds of things. And I remember that feeling, that's almost sinking feeling I would get when I was about to publish any review.
Your like, finger is hovering over the button.
It's a unique feeling. It's a feeling that's unique to publishing a video game review on a massive site. And I remember feeling it to a few good examples. I remember when I reviewed The Last of Us, I gave The Last of Us a 10. And I thought it was so clearly a 10. And I stand by that. That game's a masterpiece, one of the great games of all time. But I remember, and I didn't know at the time, I had no idea, because I always try to, I know a lot of people in a lot of other places, and I don't talk to them like about games when I'm reviewing them or when I was, because I didn't want to like have that seep in. I didn't want to know what anyone else thought. And I really thought I was going to be the only one that gave this game a 10. That was not even remotely true. Right. But I was like, here we go. And published it and, waited for the feedback, which was actually surprisingly positive, but I know I was going to get called a fanboy and all these kinds of things. And like, it's hard not to take it personally. It's like, but the one thing I bring The Last of Us up particularly is because I think The Last of Us was read by about 2 million unique people. My Last of Us review, 2 million people. It didn't have 2 million hits. It had 2 million.
Almost certainly more since
uniques,
you've left. Since the last time you checked the metrics.
And then I look at the comments, and I'm like, there's 10,000 comments.
Right.
You assume 3 comments per person on average. Some people probably left 20. Some probably left 1. I'm like, so 3,000 people think I suck, maybe. 2 million people read the review. Probably a lot of people bought it or was turned on by to The Last of Us by and turned on by it. I was turned on by The Last of Us.
Yeah.
But then I think about the other end of the spectrum, like when I reviewed Castlevania on 3DS by Mercury Steam, which was not a good game, even remotely. They had no idea what they were doing with that game. It was terrible. And that wasn't terrible, but it was bad. And I remember getting that other feeling where like the defenders of the game, even though it's not even out yet, are going to come and have something to say about that as well. So it was such a unique feeling. It was the only other mirrored feeling I had was when I was writing a controversial op-ed, which I was well known for at IGN. And it's like one of those things where
I know what you're talking about.
And I'm like, I got to put myself out there. That's just who I am. It comes with a certain amount of repercussion, but I think that people don't often think about the personal nature of criticism, and that like I don't go into any game thinking or assuming or wanting to hate it. But sometimes you do hate it, or sometimes you just like it okay, and sometimes you love it. And my only job was to be honest, and that's what I tried to do with my reviews, is just put the most honest sentiment of how I felt about it on the digital paper, and hope that it resonated with people, whatever. But I just felt like just like with anything on the internet, it gets very personal. It doesn't really focus. It's a lot of straw man attacking. Like the whole IGN getting paid off thing, like used to infuriate me because I'm like, what are you talking about? Do you have any idea? Like we're like basically living in poverty over here. You know what I mean? Like I don't understand like who's getting paid to review this.
I always loved it when it was like
ridiculous.
you gave an EA review a bad score and they'd be like, well, clearly Activision paid them off.
Right.
It's like there's that much Cold War shit going on where they're like, oh, hey, who's reviewing? Oh, hey, here's a check.
I think it was Marty.
It's so ridiculous.
It was Marty Sleva, who I don't know if someone else said this before, but the first time I heard it said was Marty said this in the office sometime last year, I think it was. He was like, seriously, the next time someone accuses me of taking a check for a review, I'm just gonna take a snapshot of my bank account, just silence everybody. Like I'm literally living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, it's funny because they get mad when it's like, oh, so they paid you to give us this good score, or it's like, oh, IGN, didn't pay or didn't, get
pay enough. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like what? Like how does that even make sense?
God forbid we come to the most logical and basic conclusion, which is that this is the way the person felt about the video game. It's a fucking video game. That's like that's the one thing I'm like, it's a video game. There are games, but I guess I just think differently, and I think a lot of people actually think the way I do, but maybe the silent majority feels this way. But when everyone, like when I talk about, like I love Mega Man or something like that, or Castlevania, and everyone's like, fucking Castlevania sucks. I'm like, I could give a fuck less if you think Castlevania sucks. I love it, So like, you're not enjoying Castlevania has literally zero effect on my life. And like, so people, it's the same thing. Like we talk about 311. Like I talk about my sisters. Like I grew up, like my sisters make fun of me all the time viciously for liking this band. And I'm like, I don't care. Like go listen to whatever the fuck you want to listen to. I'm going to listen to what I want to listen to. You not liking this band literally means nothing to me. And so like, I don't understand why more people don't walk through their lives like that, being like, what does this guy think about that? Maybe I can take something valuable away from it. Maybe I'm not, but I'm not going to let it affect me to the point where I'm writing like an angry tweet or an angry message at them. I'm like, why do you care? Like at the end of the day, my whole thing is like, why do you care if this person gives The Division a 6.7? Are you Yves Guillemot? Are you like, do you have like millions of dollars riding on this game? Like otherwise, I don't get it.
It is that vocal minority, and I think a lot of times when they get bent out of shape about it is the concern. I always love the argument you'll get of just like, this could really injure sales. They're afraid there's going to be this chilling effect for the game they love, that, oh, it reviewed poorly, so now everybody's going to step back and not buy it, and then there won't be as much DLC, and there won't be this, and there's not going to be any support, or more people won't play it. And
that's
all these like end of the world scenarios.
I think you might be right with some people. I think you might be giving most people that feel that like that do that shit way too much credit. I really do think it's a way more visceral, like
it's a validation thing.
Yeah, it's it's so weird.
Want their exact feelings to be validated, which on a scale from 1 to 10 is almost impossible. It's like if you would ask them, what would you give this game? Like this game that you love so much, would you give it a 10? And I feel like that's the thing, is like it's hard to. Like a 6.7, or it was 6.7, that says a very specific thing, That says it's not an 8.5, and it's not a 10, and it's not a 1, And I feel like a lot of other people can't wrap their heads around, all right, you either, it gets boiled down to, did you love it, did you hate it, or is it okay, And if someone doesn't nail exactly that sentiment that they're feeling, they're going to be upset about it because they just want to be validated.
I think also part of it is that what makes it a more extreme scale than it would seem like it would be, because you'd think with that with a 100-point scale, there's a lot of nuance there, right? Like there's as opposed to a 5 or a 10-point scale, there's all these gray areas that you could position your opinion in. And yet there's this other problem of the 100-point scale, which is that invokes, at least here in, for us in our country, in the United States, maybe less so other places, but for us, it definitely invokes the school grading mentality, which is an ingrained mentality of like a 65 or a 60, depending on where you went to school, is failing. A failure. There is nothing, like there are numbers below 65, but there is no grade you can get below a 65. Like once you hit 65, it doesn't matter where you go below that, it's a failure. And so when I put out a 6.7, a lot of people, a lot of smart people even, they have been told since the beginning of their rational minds existing that is almost completely unacceptable and on the verge of complete disaster. And it's just not. And I can, and to be fair to those people, I can point to the IGN review scale all I want. I can invoke that as much as I like and be like, look, this scale right here that we made up says that a 6.7 is actually almost good. And I'm not saying that that's not true and that people shouldn't read the scale. Please read the scale and please understand that that's the number system that we're using to rate it. I would love it if you would. That said, I'm not too surprised that a lot of people don't do that and they look at it and they go, well, this game I'm enjoying to this site is a complete disaster. And it's like, there should be more nuance there, but it's hard to when you have that preconceived notion about the way the numbers are supposed to work, as opposed to, say, a star system where, like I was having this discussion with our reviews editor, Dan Stapleton, this morning. He was like, what's funny is that if we had a star system, if we gave The Division 3 out of 5 stars, no one would be upset with that, and that's mathematically a lower score. It'd be a 6. 3 out of 5 would be a 6.
Exactly. Yeah.
But no one would be upset about it because they don't equate stars to grades. Mm-hmm. But like when you have a 100-point scale, you equate it to grades.
And I think also then it becomes comparing it to everyone else's scale. And it's you giving a 6.7, someone else gave it an 8, and they're like, well, everyone else is giving it an 8, but it's like they're grading on different scales. You know, you can't just compare all of them.
And they're also different people.
Yeah, and there's so many different factors, and that's where it gets hard because it's not just there isn't an answer. And like what Colin was saying earlier, like there is no rules. It is just opinion.
And and also to say, well, I totally appreciate, Colin is coming at it very much from the standpoint of how stressful and even a little bit ridiculous it can seem for people to have a strong kind of emotional reaction to your, to your critique. That said, while that can be overwhelming to handle and deal with at times, that's definitely part of the job, and it's hard at times until it's always hard. you get better at managing it, but there's no two ways about it. Having your feed filled up with, or your messages or your email or whatever filled up with people directing anger and aggression at you is, unless you have no feelings, it's not the best thing. Yeah. But that said, we should not use that as a reason to say, let's not be critical of how we critique, because we absolutely need to. Like, I don't think that video game critique as a whole, and I'm not saying that I'm exempt from this either. I'm not saying I'm some great, paragon of critical acumen, but the way we critique video games as a whole across our industry, this is big sites, small sites, at IGN, we're not nearly all the way there. We have a lot of work to do before video game critique has the level of nuance, understanding, and insightfulness that readers and viewers deserve. And so we should not, yes, we should defend ourselves from being attacked personally, but we should not defend ourselves from having the way we do our work critiqued. Like, yes, there's no such thing as an objective review, objective. I agree. You can't, the idea of it being objective is completely eliminated by the fact that I'm a person and I have a different perspective than you do.
Exactly.
But just because you cannot make, just because an objective or fully objective review doesn't exist, doesn't mean that a balanced critique does not exist. And we're not all there yet. And that's where I think we should listen to our, to our viewers, listen to our readers, and sift through some of the anger and aggression and see the truth that's in there about how we can get better at it. Because video games deserve that, and so do the people who play them.
Well put.
Amen.